As extreme as it sounds, I'm genuinely not exaggerating when I say that the ending of OMORI was one of the most profoundly emotional experiences I've ever had. Most of you probably know the word catharsis. It's defined as the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. And I can hardly think of a more fitting word to encapsulate the ending of this game and the experience that it is. If you play the game earnestly, there are two catharses occurring in parallel with one another. One catharsis for our protagonist, Sunny, who can finally overcome all that he's fought to overcome, and one catharsis, not least, for you, the player, whose emotional landscape will by now be so closely intertwined with Sunny's that whatever he feels, you can feel as well. Throughout the story, we're taken for a trip through some of the deepest and darkest parts of the human experience that exist out there, as the brilliant storytelling and characteristic symbolic qualities of the game unfold. In my last video on OMORI, I looked at what happens if Sunny doesn't manage to overcome the overwhelming weight of the burden placed on him. How the optional sections of Black Space 2 essentially represent the murky psychological landscape of a mind which has given up on ever returning to reality. The place where Sunny's mind, for a lack of anything better to do, wanders aimlessly as life floats past him like a fog that will never again give way to the clarity of real experience or to the catharsis of self-forgiveness. But for today's video, I'll be returning one last time to the timeline of reconciliation, of overcoming that guilt and self-loathing. To conclude my not-so-short series analysing this game, I'll be looking at how all the rich psychological symbolism we've explored so far finally culminates after everything we've been through alongside Sunny, as these wounds he's been living with for so long finally heal. I'll be looking at the role of the musical instruments we see in the game, the photo album, as well as memories and reminiscence in finally convincing Sunny that he's wrong, that he can be forgiven, and indeed that he deserves just that. This is the ultimate lesson OMORI teaches us, that the greatest thing you have to overcome to make progress in life is yourself. And obviously, spoiler alert my friends, as if I haven't already spoiled everything, you certainly should not be watching this video if you haven't played OMORI. And you should also not be watching this video if you haven't already watched my other videos on the game. So go have a look at the playlist in the description if that's you. The ending of the game is first led up to by the events of the last day in Faraway Town. 1 day left. As I've already implied, the ending of OMORI is all about catharsis or reconciliation, whatever you prefer, in a way that's more distinct than in most video games or stories in general. Because it isn't just a narrative catharsis, a catharsis of all the elements of the story finally coming together in the end and feeling complete. It's, of course, also a psychological catharsis experienced both by Sunny, as I said, and by us as players. In the events prior to the ending, Sunny has already made great progress towards this. Ultimately, the great antagonist of the story is the very act of repression itself, and Sunny has already overcome most of his repression in this regard through the search for Basil in Headspace and its eventual culmination with his entry into Black Space, where the truth of his suffering and the nature of his problems finally become clear to him. But despite this clarity, the actual thing that has been repressed still remains to be unveiled. Sunny starts the game completely oblivious to his predicament, at least when he's in Headspace, and the truth appears merely as indistinct cracks and holes in the apparent happiness and safety of Headspace, as I discussed in my first video. But even though these cracks have given way to Black Space, and shown us the depth of the grave that Sunny has dug himself into, we still haven't quite been able to see what inspired him to pick up the shovel in the first place. The truth itself, the final reveal, only occurs when everything else has fallen into place, when he's ready to accept it. And before he's ready to do that, there's another reconciliation which must also occur first. The actual, real and tangible reconciliation with the people in his life. The friends who gradually drifted apart from one another after Mari's death. It's at this point that I'd like to tie in the photo album as the central symbol for the state of Sunny's relationships with his friends and of the unity of the friend group as a whole. Whereas the false, artificial photo album seen in Headspace is complete from the get-go, reflecting Sunny's inability to even recognize the fact that he's in a predicament, let alone make progress in overcoming it. The real photo album starts off fragmented and even obscured. It's mentioned throughout the faraway town segments of the game that Aubrey found Basil's photo album with everyone's faces scribbled out. And thinking it was Basil, she took the pain she felt out on him and started bullying him. These events form the groundwork for the conflict within the friend group that occurs in Faraway Town, in parallel with the conflict inside Sunny's mind that makes up the majority of the game. Of course, although Aubrey thought it was Basil, it was actually Sunny who scribbled the faces out of the photo album rather than Basil. And I'd like to point out how ironic it is that Sunny, in his attempts to ease his own pain by erasing the memories which might draw him back to the truth, instead ended up making the situation drastically worse by cutting a rift not only in his own mind, but in the very friend group he misses so much. Through Sunny's unconscious and accidental actions, Mari was killed, and he was cast into the depths of despair. But it was also through his unconscious actions in scribbling out the faces in the photo album that a schism was drawn in the precious friend group he wanted to protect all this time. We often do things in fear or guilt, which only serve to make our situations worse than they need to be. And that's exactly what happened to Sunny in this case. So, the last thing that has to happen in the narrative before Sunny can finally become conscious of and accept the truth is the reconciliation of the friend group in Faraway Town. The main obstacle preventing this throughout the Faraway Town segments, of course, is Aubrey. Unlike the others, Aubrey's prime coping mechanism happens to be one of rejection and aggression, largely of course because of what she thought Basil did to the photo album. As a result, she rejects and pushes away the other members of the friend group and resorts to delinquency and the construction of a rough exterior to hide away what's in reality a soft and vulnerable inside that feels rejected and ignored. After the reconciliation, we're made to see, just as is often the case with characters like this, that this facade of not caring about others and pushing them away is in reality one of the most surefire symptoms of internal pain and stress. You know, after everyone drifted apart, I felt so alone. But now I realized that I was the one who was pushing everyone away. Aubrey, despite being the most distant member of the group, is the one who, in the end, feels the strongest compulsion to ask Sunny if it'd be too much trouble if he could come visit once in a while. And we also mustn't forget where this reconciliation takes place. The treehouse, and with it, the site of Mari's supposed suicide. It's by returning to the most resonant site of all those blissful, nostalgic memories that the group can finally feel united like they did all those years ago. This is important because just as Sunny's overall reconciliation with himself is achieved by his remembrance of the truth, and perhaps even more importantly, his reminiscence of all those happy memories that he cherished so much before they slipped into repression, it's the remembrance of the group as a whole of all the memories they had together that allows them to become united again. So Sunny's coming to terms with his painful truth individually by looking back at the past, which we'll get to in a few minutes, is foreshadowed by the friend group as a whole revisiting both the happy memories they made together, as well as acknowledging and coming to terms with the pain of Mari's death together. It's by looking back on their past and coming to terms with it once and for all that Sunny and his friends find the key to unlocking the possibility of a better future. And in Sunny's case, that key isn't just a figurative one, but a physical one as well. Don't forget, it's in the toy box. So, two things are still preventing the true, final reconciliation. Firstly, the truth which has been buried in the deepest depths of Sunny's mind has to be extracted once and for all. And although the friend group is almost united, everyone having opened themselves up and come to terms with one another, there's still one person who's been living in the shadow of his worst mistake for a long time. A mistake which can't be overcome quite so easily. Sunny has to save Basil in reality, just as he tried to save him in Black Space. Oh boy, this is where the real fun begins, my friends. The first thing we notice is that when Sunny falls asleep and wakes up in White Space now, he doesn't wake up as OMORI. Instead, he's still himself, in colors, and the counterpart, which has been serving as his vessel all this time, is standing before him, separated from him. Whereas Sunny's real identity was previously relegated to unconsciousness, giving way to his new form of OMORI, by living out his real life in Faraway Town, Sunny's real self is now able to resurface independently of OMORI. In connection with this, it's worth pointing out here how much of an important role colors play in the character designs of this game. Sunny used to live a life of repression, and so the form he takes on reflects his state of mind, a black and white figure, lacking in color just as Sunny himself was lacking in life and soul. But now, the color has returned to him because he's starting to live the life of a real human again. He's ready to leave his head space and return to reality. The tissue box that he used to wipe his sorrows away is now simply labeled a tissue box. He isn't going to wipe his sorrows away anymore. In the following sequence, the metaphor I've mentioned several times throughout my previous analyses finally reaches its natural conclusion as Sunny grabs the dark bulb, which by now has come to resonate with the libido of the truth, desperately trying to breach the constraints of its confinement, and he breaks it into pieces. Something emerges in all its glory, and we get to experience a repeat of each of the fear fights as Sunny affirms his overcoming them. We really get to see here just how well made the whole overcome mechanic is as well. When Sunny merely calms down, he takes a full breath, but his eyes remain closed, reflecting the fact that it's merely a way to remain stable, to prevent a panic, a means to remain standing rather than an end that will extract him out of his suffering. When he focuses, he only breathes in, as if getting ready for something or immersing himself in something, fittingly enough since that's essentially what focusing means. When he persists, he takes a full breath and opens his eyes halfway. He's resisting an external force, but he's still passive. He's still persisting rather than taking his own action and facing his demons head on. But when he finally gathers all his courage and overcomes, he takes a deep breath and his eyes open wide as that oh so satisfying piano note rings like a bell. This, my friends, is how you fuse symbolism with simple game mechanics. Now, some of you will remember from my Black Space 1 video that Sunny's search through Black Space is in reality the search for a light bulb. Back in Black Space, he never found it because the truth wasn't ready to be revealed. But now, the light bulb is free. The thing Sunny has been fighting to reclaim, memory, and alongside it, an idea that has long been repressed. The idea that there does, in fact, despite everything, exist a future for him. The truth segment itself follows the appearance of the light bulb, since the truth is literally what the light bulb is. It takes the form of Sunny collecting various photos which together outline the events leading up to and constituting Mari's death, and the staging of her suicide. After picking up the light bulb, Sunny finds himself on a road through a forest riddled with scattered daisies, symbolizing nothing less than new beginnings, innocence, and in the Hanakatoba, the Japanese language of flowers, faith. Basil's faith that Sunny would return. Here, he meets the real Basil. That Basil which was recreated in his mind at the end of Black Space. If you'll remember, I talked in my Black Space video about how Black Space itself revolves around a kind of conflict of opposites between the two versions of Basil that exist in Sunny's mind. The Basil we see here is as close as we can get to the real Basil, created by fusing together the innocent and unconscious headspace Basil with the repressed shadow Basil who has tried to lead Sunny to the truth all this time. He's complete now, and so he can meet Sunny once more to encourage him before what is to come. The following sequences essentially take the form of a crescendo, where each aspect of the incident is outlined by the different photos and the contexts in which they're found. Sunny's entry into the tree trunk here essentially becomes his entry into a rabbit hole. After he enters, there's no going back. The first room seems to simply be a memory from the aftermath of Mari's death, and one of the few places we get a vague impression of Sunny's mother. My only daughter is gone. You are my only son. I can't lose you as well. The next room, though, is the first one that's really interesting, as it consists of a set of numerous hospital beds, all containing apparitions of Mari, seemingly on life support. The hospital symbolism connects to the events in the particular photos we find here. Although we don't see it in the final game, there exists unused text for each of the photos describing the series of events as they unfolded on the day of the incident. Placing it all into context, we realize that after finding Mari unresponsive at the bottom of the stairs, Sunny and Basil at first carried her to her bed, hoping for the possibility that she might wake up if she just got some rest. This person is breathing steadily. She's going to wake up, right? This is all just a dream, right? But then, Sunny checks her pulse. You sink your fingers into her arm and break down into tears. This person is not breathing. The hospital symbolism evokes the naive hope of rest and recovery, The idea that this is something that can be remedied somehow. But after picking up the last photo in the room, one of the Maoris in the hospital beds isn't breathing anymore. This presentation with all the hospital beds is a way of placing us into the mindset that Sunny was in at that very specific moment while he was sitting at her bedside, as he prayed desperately that Mari was like a patient in a hospital rather than a corpse in a morgue. I'd like to add an extra layer of meaning to this as well, though. Even after picking up the last photo, most of the Maoris are still breathing steadily. It's only this one Maori here that's not breathing anymore. This specific choice, to me, seems to suggest a kind of frustration or disbelief on the part of Sunny, or even a sense of absurdity to the whole situation. Remember the absurdity area? Let me explain. Out of all the possible worlds Sunny could have been born into, out of all the possible Maoris that live in all these possible worlds, symbolized by each of the hospital beds, the one world that Sunny happens to live in also happened to be the one where this inconceivable freak accident occurred. Not only did Sunny push Mari down the stairs out of frustration in just the wrong place, but all the worst possible circumstances conspired to make it fatal. Mari had a bad knee, which worsened her ability to brace herself, and she just happened to land in just the wrong way. There's a certain very low probability that something like this could have happened to any one of us, and this specific choice to include so many Maoris where only one of them flatlines expresses the absurdity and frustration with reality that Sunny must have experienced in the moments following the incident, because there's 1,000 alternative worlds where Mari didn't die. It would have taken just one thing being slightly different and the tragedy wouldn't have happened. But it did happen. After this, Sunny is now at the top of those stairs, and his sprite is slowly changing. As he descends the stairs, picking up each of the photos reminding him of what he did, his sprite becomes mutilated. I've talked about this before, but this is by far where it's used to the greatest effect. The physical mutilation of Sunny's sprite becomes an expression of his overwhelming self-loathing, an inevitable consequence of all those memories buried for so long, flowing back to consciousness. The more that the true weight of the truth and his actions bear down on him, the more powerful that self-loathing becomes, manifesting physically in the form of this mutilation. But just as things become unbearable, he's suddenly in the bedroom, and we finally witness the origin of those words which have played such a central role throughout the whole narrative, and which somehow managed to linger in Sunny's mind, despite all that self-loathing and all those efforts to repress. Sunny, don't worry. Everything is going to be okay. It's strange how a few words can resonate so much, despite seeming so untrue. Finally, we reach a stage. We can hear the tuning of an orchestra in the background. I can hardly think of a better piece of background noise to add at this particular stage, for reasons I'll get to very soon. Sunny can't reach the stage yet because something is blocking the way. There are still a few more photos left. The self-loathing symbolism is taken to its utmost as he continues picking up the photos. For each photo picked up, Sunny loses a finger. As I've talked about earlier, Sunny's hands after the incident become the most distinguished symbol of his guilt. These were the hands that pushed Mari down the stairs to her untimely death, and so this grotesque amputation becomes a reflection of Sunny's hatred of them, and by extension himself, of course. The idea that if only it hadn't been for these hands, Mari would still be alive. And in particular, it's his right hand whose fingers are amputated, which was indeed the specific hand he used to push Mari, as we see in one of the photos. So the message is very obvious here. At the center of the stage, we find the photo of the broken violin, the evidence for a recital that was never performed. I'll talk much more about the recital and the violin when we get to the ending, but for now, it's suffice to say that the violin is perhaps the single most important and overarching symbol and metaphor for the entirety of what the game is about, which is why we find it here, as we hear the orchestra tuning for a recital which is, in fact, going to be performed. After being extracted by this finger mandala thing, Sunny is back in his favorite room, and he can finally screw in the light bulb and illuminate the truth once and for all. But before picking up the most painful photo of them all, Sunny can choose to sit down in this chair one more time, shifting the atmosphere entirely as we hear birds chirping and the wind blowing in the background. A brief, fleeting relief. We learn from the mysterious headspace character, Keeper of the Castle, that this room is what Sunny desires most, as it's what replaces Sweetheart's Castle if we accept his offer in the OMORI route. Based on this, I conclude that this room and the sense of peace that comes with it embodies the idea of a world in which Mari never died. It's Sunny in the midst of all his despair, taking a brief moment to pretend that he lives in one of those blissful worlds where things went just a little bit differently. One of those worlds corresponding to the many Maris that keep on breathing in the hospital room. We're sort of invited to imagine here what it would have been like if Mari never died. To imagine the progression of the timeline and the friend group in that alternative world. A world where Sunny never lost his sister and Hiro never lost the love of his life. Where all that pain simply never happened. While writing this, I can't help but see the image of all of them sitting in the treehouse as Mari arrives with a fresh tray of cookies, getting ready to play another game of cards. But we can't linger. We have to move on. That's what this is about. We're very close now. Sunny is back in that forest with the many gates, except, once again, the atmosphere has drastically shifted. There's really something ominous to this whole sequence. The way the black and white photos gleam with this strange light, perhaps corresponding to that red gloom from the windows in Sunny's house when he's facing his fears. And as it gleams, there's this nondescript noise droning on in the background. It feels deeply suspenseful, and at the same time, it's almost as if the noise is just an auditory expression of that unnatural light shining in the photos, giving the whole sequence and its atmosphere an incredibly holistic character. In this last area, we find all the photos associated with the staging of Mari's suicide. And Sunny has to pass through all those gates once more. When we pick up the last photo, everything falls into place, as we get to see how it all unfolded on that day, tying together the fragmented memories and, in the end, how that demon we've been fighting to repress all this time was born as Sunny foolishly chose to look back one last time after the unholy deed. Suddenly, Basil stops. You look up at his eyes, but this time, they're wide awake, staring at something. You turn your eyes toward it as well, though you wish you didn't. An eye meets yours. Your heart sinks into your stomach. You shouldn't have looked back. You just shouldn't have looked. The truth has finally been recalled. After having been pushed by Mari to practice for his performance at the recital, Sunny reached his limit, and in a fit of rage, he threw his violin down the stairs, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. After a furious argument, he tried to escape by going down the staircase himself, but Mari stepped in front of him, and in a fit of rage, a moment of irrational, misguided anger, he pushed her down the stairs as well, and the whole world conspired to make it fatal. In a misguided attempt to help his friend, Basil was the one who came up with the unholy plan of staging her suicide, which is of course why he continually begs Sunny for forgiveness throughout the game. As he comforted Sunny while he lay disoriented, he spoke those words which would imprint themselves in Sunny's mind for all these years. Everything is going to be okay. And then, as soon as we glimpse the nature of the truth, Sunny wakes up. This is one of the last points in the game where we find ourselves at a crossroads. If he so desires, Sunny can choose to simply go back to bed, but doing so will yield us perhaps the worst ending possible, as Basil commits suicide while Sunny sleeps dreamlessly, rebuking the hope Basil has held throughout the entire game that Sunny would come back for him, and burdening the rest of the friend group with an almost unthinkable trauma. The incredible importance of this moment is reflected by the intense tension of the background track. A simple, yet deeply ominous jingle, if you can call it that. To add on to this, if we interact with the sleeping Kel, Hero, or Aubrey, we're given Sunny's affectionate descriptions of them, and that he will really miss them. Depending on your choices, there can be two very different reasons for why he would have to miss them, not necessarily just because he's moving away. Anyway, for the last time we're asked, do you want to save Basil? And choosing yes, we're for the first time ever witness to the sad reality of the place that the real Basil has ended up psychologically. Before the fateful quote-unquote battle that takes place between the two, we really get to see what kind of psychological hole Basil has fallen into. Whereas Sunny's unconscious chose complete repression of the truth, Basil instead seems here to be suffering from a severe psychosis, seeing hallucinations of something all around him, because he's unable to fully, consciously accept the fact that Sunny, his best friend, pushed Mari to her death, and that they staged her suicide together to absolve themselves of guilt. He finds a fleeting and temporary relief in deluding himself that there really was something behind Sunny that did it. When Mari fell, you couldn't have done it. It was something behind you, wasn't it? You're a good person, Sunny. I know you're a good person. A good person wouldn't do something like that. Basil essentially half-assed his repression, and so he had to invent a scapegoat of sorts, a temporary coping mechanism to alleviate the impossible weight of having to accept total responsibility for it. We have to remember here that it's not just a question of an accidental death or actions done with unquestionably good intentions. Although Basil was desperately trying to help Sunny, his best friend, through the most painful moments of his life, they did still ultimately stage the suicide in a deliberate and deceptive manner to prevent the truth from reaching anyone else. No matter the underlying reasons, an action like that is an impossible thing to have bearing down on your conscience, so it's no wonder Basil resorted to what appears to be a debilitating psychosis to lighten the burden. Soon, though, these two friends find themselves in the tragic grapple, as Basil hallucinates something and seems to confuse it with Sunny himself. It's a sad scene where the two friends nearly tear each other apart through all the pain, confusion, and delirium they've been forced to go through. A detail I love is how Sunny's heartbeats, shown on the heart monitor, having replaced the energy bar back in Headspace, become increasingly frequent as the battle goes on, showing how his heart beats faster and faster with the panic of the situation, until he becomes stressed out, the most extreme form of the fear emotion. Then, the heart monitor seems to read, "Everything is going to be okay," in the most elegant handwriting. It's a simple lie, but one whose utterance becomes increasingly compulsive in direct proportion to the degree of its falsehood. The more stressed out you become, the more you keep telling yourself this statement you know deep down to be a lie. There's also a sense of delusion to it. As Sunny becomes more and more desperate and keeps repeating this phrase endlessly, it absorbs all his focus, and in his desperation he begins hallucinating it, even seeing it in his physical environment. At the end of the battle, of course, Basil stabs Sunny in his right eye, and the screen darkens as he collapses into his final, most decisive dream. Before we get to that, though, I have to point out the very obvious significance of Sunny being stabbed in his right eye in the light of the information we have from the truth segment. Because it was the right eye of Mari's corpse hanging from that tree that instigated the birth of something, of that thing that has haunted Sunny throughout all this time. Being stabbed in this eye, and perhaps even losing it permanently, becomes a gruesomely ironic way to express something positive. The right eye was the eye that gazed at him as he looked back foolishly one last time on that day. It was the right eye that's been haunting and following him wherever he goes, just as his own physical right eye necessarily follows him wherever he goes. So its removal becomes a metaphor for the death of that demon, of something itself. And before we move on, I'd also like to point out that this whole eye business largely corresponds to the supernatural idea of the evil eye. The belief that someone giving you a malevolent glare from a distance can constitute a curse that will haunt you with misfortune unless you protect yourself from it. This is exactly what happened to Sunny. Mari's corpse gazed at him with that evil eye, and from that point on, he was cursed. In any case, Sunny now finds himself at a crossroads. This time, literally, as he wakes up in an environment that contrasts immensely with the darkness of Basil's room. There are a few meanings to this. Firstly, although Sunny has now freed himself from the truth in the form of something expressed physiologically through the loss of his eye, there's still, as we know, one more thing that remains to be overcome. So Sunny is still at a crossroads in terms of which identity he'll ultimately choose to give into. At the same time, if we go north in this area, we'll find a couple gravestones, and in the far north, the window. That window. As I've said before, this window is a symbol for the gateway into the afterlife, as it's the gateway Mari passes through in her spirit form when communicating with Sunny. And furthermore, it's one that Sunny has seen before, the last time he was at the lake. We also see its meaning expressed very subtly a little earlier when Sunny sees a vision of Basil's grandma after she's passed away, turning around before finally facing north, the direction of that window, of the afterlife. Its appearance here then becomes an expression of the fact that Sunny almost passed through the gateway again, in the form of this near-death experience after Basil stabbed his right eye with his garden shears. He's at a crossroads here in the sense that he in any case came close to death, but also because he still has a choice to make between life and death, between Sunny and OMORI. And so of course an ambiguous voice speaks to him through the closed curtain. Your acknowledgement of the truth has come at a great cost, but it's still not too late for redemption. Fortunately, you still know the way home. Also notice all the pinwheels littering the outside. The pinwheel throughout the game has obtained the role of a symbol of one's reminiscence of the past, and the cherishing of those memories, as well as childhood in particular, given the childish character of the pinwheel. Earlier, for example, Aubrey placed a pinwheel on the tree stump of the tree that Mari hung from after storming out of the treehouse. Eventually, we'll notice none other than Muo, Mari's lost kitten, leading us home. And soon, we reach Sunny's house, where we meet Basil one last time. In many ways, what he says here is like a summary of what OMORI is about as a game. All this pain we've been feeling, the guilt in our hearts, even if you try to bottle it all up, it all comes out somehow. I want to say that everything will be okay, that we have no choice but to carry on, but that's up to you. Aubrey, Kel and Hero are good friends. You have to trust that they'll forgive us. It's hard to truly believe that, but the photos in our album, they're not just photos. They're real memories, our memories. It's proof of our friendship. Let's make some new memories together, okay? Guilt, repression, overcoming the past, and moving on. The impossible hopelessness of forgiveness, but also the hopeful solace to be found in one's memories. The hope that those memories are more powerful than the demons of your past. The hope that there exists a positive future. As we enter, we're in the most beautiful way presented, not with Sunny's house in any of the forms we've seen it up until now, but as it was before. A yellow glow, somewhat unlike the normal lighting seen before, seems to permeate the place, and the coloring, combined with the simplistic version of the duet being played by Mari in the background, gives the place a distinctly nostalgic character. And I think that is exactly the emotion that's being evoked here. All the various items of the household are back in their places, as they were before, 3 years ago, and we can interact with almost every single one of them. But this time, the descriptions are much more personal, and we get them from the first person rather than the second person point of view. We've always had a large backyard, so it's nice to finally make use of it now that there's a treehouse. The treehouse is further back, but I can still see my favorite tree. A warm fireplace. My baby pictures are over the mantel. I don't like to smile, not even in photos. It's a little hard to articulate why unless you've played the game, but this area is one of the most impactful ones in my opinion. Although I'd say that empathy is the most distinct emotional theme in OMORI, if you will, it should be clear by now that nostalgia and reminiscing one's most cherished memories from childhood is a close second. And after learning so much about the personalities, tendencies and events in the lives of the characters, as players we're primed to experience this section and the descriptions with all their detail in a very personal way. In fact, the detail-oriented character of these descriptions is symptomatic of one of the main things that makes the characters so human throughout the game as a whole. One of the subtlest examples I could find of this is the description of the grandfather clock. One of 2 old grandfather clocks. This one always seems to be running behind. It seems so innocuous, but even something as simple as the idea that Sunny throughout his time living in this house, has noticed this little detail contributes greatly to giving him the character of a real human being. It's easier to empathize with a real human being than a character, and the quality that differentiates a real human from a mere character or even a stereotype isn't in the general and broad information about them, it's in the details of their lives, like this one. The unique thoughts they have and the things they notice, like the precise relationship between the pace of two clocks in their childhood home. And I don't know about you, but for me, nostalgia in general is a deeply detail-oriented emotion as well. It's triggered by the most specific sensations, the most specific smells, sounds and visions, and this sequence evokes that kind of reverie just perfectly to me. Now, when we enter the piano room, once again, none other than Mari is waiting for us, and Muo, of course. A distinct light is once again emanating from outside the open window, signaling the fact that this isn't just an artificial, dreamlike recreation of Mari, but the image of her spirit shining through. You'll forgive yourself, won't you? You can do this, Sunny. You've worked really hard to get to this point. There's only one thing left to do now. Know that I'll always be watching over you, okay? As long as you remember me, I'll be here. Mari forgave Sunny a long time ago. It isn't for the sake of her forgiveness that Sunny has to go through all of this. It isn't for the sake of anyone else's forgiveness that any of us experience any guilt, but for the sake of our own forgiveness. And once again, this concept of memory is emphasized. As long as you remember me, I'll be here. Just as you can lose yourself in dwelling on the worst memories of your past, preventing you from living out your real life in the present. And on the other hand, just as you can cherish your happiest memories of the past and let them motivate you as you move into the future, a person you've lost can also continue to live in your mind and heart as a memory. But to do that, you have to move on. The best way to honor Mari's memory and to keep her memory alive is to live. If we go to the left of the stairs now, a door which has remained hidden throughout the game is finally visible and accessible. Sunny has obtained the literal key to reconciling with his past, and with it, the key to his future. Now we can finally talk about the broken violin. As I stated earlier, the violin is arguably the single most important symbolic item in the entire game. The violin in essence represents everything that was broken on that day. As we see in the photo album and the memory lane sequence which follows directly after Sunny opens the toy box, the violin was the sole Christmas gift Sunny received from all his friends, from all of us. It thus becomes the most profound symbol for the bonds between Sunny and each of his friends, the state of the violin becoming a direct expression of the state of Sunny's relationship with his friends and the state of the friend group as a whole. In the following sequence, Sunny re-experiences his most cherished memories as seen in the photo album, and for each memory he cherishes, the violin mends a part of itself. The mending of the violin is the mending of those broken relationships. By cherishing his happiest memories, Sunny breathes new life into them, and in the process, he breathes new life into his relationships with his friends, and his own outlook on life, which is precisely what the violin is. And beyond the friend group as a whole, the violin is even more so a symbol for Sunny's relationship with Mari in particular. When Sunny threw his violin down the stairs, He denied Mari the thing she had been working towards for months, the recital. For as long as the violin remains broken in Sunny's mind, and the recital remains unperformed, it's impossible for Sunny to reconcile with Mari, despite her having forgiven him. And as the violin becomes a symbol for the broken state of his relationship with Mari and by association, her death, its placement in the closet and Sunny's repression of the closet's existence throughout the game becomes an expression of Sunny's denial of reality. There is nothing here. There is no broken violin, just as there is no broken relationship. But if you refuse to even accept the existence of a problem, the existence of something that's been broken, you can't possibly hope to fix it, can you? That explains the climactic nature of this moment, this rediscovery. By finding the violin, Sunny has finally recalled the existence of what was broken, and so he can finally set to work as an emotional luthier. As I said, the following sequence of memory lane takes the form of Sunny recalling a few of his most cherished memories from before Mari's death, demonstrating its symbolic role as the embodiment of the essence of these memories. As we progress through them, interacting with the environment provides us with additional details which serve to reinforce the sense of nostalgia and, by extension, humanity of the memories, drawing us ever closer to that catharsis. And of course, memory lane culminates with Sunny's re-experience of that Christmas day when he first received his violin. This year, you get just one present from all of us. The dialogue shifts between each of Sunny's friends as they introduce the gift, indicating how each of them is connected to it, and by extension to Sunny, once again reinforcing the violin's central role as the tether that binds them together. And then, the violin regained its shape. After having reconciled with his friends in the external world, Sunny has now also reconciled with them in his own internal world, and just one thing remains: reconciling with himself, the most difficult thing of all. A stage. Of course it's a stage. The same one we saw in the truth segment. Here, his friends appear one last time to give him the final push. Their transition from childhood to adolescent sprites becomes an analogy for moving into the future. These aren't the false headspace friends Sunny's been clinging onto all this time, but his real friends. The room turns dark, and the time comes for Sunny's grand performance. The stage is ready for you. The camera shifts through a practically endless array of empty seats before reaching the stage. There's a strange, sad kind of emptiness to it. Nobody's there to witness his performance because it was meant to be held years ago, the concert hall now having become abandoned and derelict. And just as there is no audience, there's also nobody there to accompany him in his performance. Nevertheless, Sunny performs his solo because he has to. He has to wallow in the feeling of what he's lost so that he can come to terms with it once and for all. After his performance, he collapses into tears. Finally, the ultimate battle. The battle with oneself. As I've said, everything has been building up to this point because the ultimate hurdle blocking the path between Sunny and the future isn't his faltering relationship with his friends. It isn't his friends' inability to forgive him or Mari's inability to forgive him. It's his inability to forgive himself. The battle with Omori himself is the ultimate, and I really mean ultimate, expression of that conflict of opposites that defines both the plot and the thematic content of the game. Throughout all this time, Sunny has been living in a self-imposed dream, nearly giving up himself in the process. What started as a coping mechanism has gained so much power that it's almost impossible to resist it. Like I said in my first video, the temporary protection afforded by Omori is only achieved in exchange for the slow draining of Sunny's self. Over time, Sunny's real self has faded, slowly being amputated as Omori grows. And the only way to change that is to face the demon he's created. This might be a good place to note the fact that there are many levels of abstraction on which this thematic conflict can be understood. It's the battle between Sunny and Omori, yes, but it isn't just that. Looking at it that way doesn't really do it justice. This battle is also an extreme example of a kind of inner conflict that we all experience. The human mind is fundamentally composed of many different parts which fight one another for control of your conscious actions. Snooze the alarm or don't snooze the alarm, ask her out or don't ask her out, play games for another hour or finish your Omori video manuscript, come to terms with reality or abandon reality. It's understanding this fact which equips us to truly empathize with Sunny in the most profound way. Sunny's internal battle is one of cataclysmic proportions, but it's fundamentally the very same kind of inner conflict we all experience. And so all we have to do to understand Sunny is imagine that conflict consuming our lives to the point where we no longer know who we are. You've caused so much suffering, yet you do nothing, and so you've earned nothing in return. Your friends will never forgive you. They'll abandon you, just like you did them. You're nothing but a liar, and when they see the truth, they'll hate you as much as you hate yourself. Imagine being consumed by this kind of self-hatred, constantly hearing an inner voice telling you that you can never make progress, that there's no hope for you, that there's no hope that anyone could ever forgive you. The mouthpiece of all the negative things you tell yourself, consuming your entire being. A voice that's flourished like a parasite, growing louder and louder the more you listen to it until it booms so loudly that you can no longer hear the sound of your own heartbeat. It's grown so powerful that no matter what you do, it only seems to grow louder. Omori did not succumb. Omori will not succumb. But of course, in Sunny's case, the fact that this battle is even taking place shows that there is hope. There used to be a time when Sunny didn't exist in his own mind, when there was only Omori living out the empty life of Headspace. But Sunny's long-forgotten, true self has now boiled to the surface again, emerging from the unconscious. As Omori's stabs and words of hatred continuously tear Sunny apart, he manages to keep standing only by cherishing those precious memories we witnessed earlier and remembering the words of his friends, by holding on to that hope. You remembered Kel's words. You remembered Aubrey's wish. You remembered Hero's promise. You remembered Basil's hope. And you remembered Mari's request. As the battle draws on, the imagery increasingly hints at the truth, as Mari's tangled hair hangs down behind Omori, and Sunny's face briefly morphs into the demonic image seen in his distorted portrait as Helmari envelops him each time he's attacked. I've heard theories that the highly distorted version of the track OMORI that plays here is actually a representation of the argument between Sunny and Mari after he threw his violin down the stairs. In the end, Sunny seems unable to overcome OMORI, his inner critic having grown too powerful, the voice booming too loud in his mind to vanquish. We're presented with the very last choice we can make as players. Do you want to continue? If we choose yes, Sunny will finally do the one thing that everything has been building up towards. The only way to vanquish OMORI once and for all is to do the thing he was unable to do all those years ago, to make up for what he did to Mari by fulfilling her wish, performing the recital with her. The previous recital wasn't complete because Mari wasn't there to perform it with him. But now, sweet catharsis. Like I said at the beginning of this video, OMORI's ending is profoundly cathartic. And the bulk of that catharsis is unleashed in the form of the last duet. This is where all the elements that have been building up throughout the game are given their final resolution. It's the performance of a musical piece we've only heard played in fragments up until now, finally ready to be performed in full. Sunny's whole life unfolds before us. We see him growing up alongside Mari, meeting his friends, being saved by her after he fell into the lake, a retrospective of his life as we know it. It's almost impossible not to feel some kind of emotion when watching this for the first time. The painful transition from Sunny being embraced by Mari after being saved to being all alone, stuck in time. The way he gazes longingly at her spirit as she plays her last notes before she disappears into that grand portal, its curtains blowing in the wind, leaving the piano empty, without a pianist. Like the violin, the piano becomes a representation for the state of Sunny's life. The recital never being performed, the piano never being played, becomes a metaphor for stasis, lack of spirit, both Maury's literal spirit as the player of the piano, and Sonny's metaphorical spirit, the meaning in his life, the meaning he used to have so much of in the form of his close-knit friend group, and more broadly his entire relationship with the outside world. Since the piano has stood empty for so long, the last duet is the breathing of new life into Sonny's existence. OMORI was a piano without a pianist in the same way that Sonny, while living through OMORI, was a human without a life. But now, the pianist has returned to accompany him in the recital that was never performed, and so they can finally reunite. Sonny's self can finally be whole again. We see this first as the piano fades away at the very end of the recital, and then as Sonny's two halves finally embrace, reconciled before OMORI fades away, representing Sonny's decision to keep living. Sonny bows after his performance before entering a white door. But this white door is different from the one in white space, a door into reality rather than into headspace. Sonny's catharsis is complete. Now he just has to tell his friends the truth. The atmosphere of the hospital, with its white color palette and brightness, induces a sense of peace, or even of heaven to some extent. There's definitely a reason why the epilogue of a story involving the overcoming of something, or of a battle of some sort, often takes place in a hospital. There's this powerful association between waking up there and having come out at the other end, so to speak. Like, you did it. Sonny's choice to live his real life is reaffirmed one last time as he imagines his headspace friends in the hallway, running north towards the balcony that Sonny in this timeline is not going to jump from. In any case, we see again the association between headspace and death here. Perpetually living in your dreams at the expense of reality amounts to nothing but death. But like I said, we're not going that way. We're going south, because Sonny has something to tell his real friends. A vision of Basel leads us to our final destination, where everyone is waiting for us. I just love how the presence of Maury's spirit is conveyed by the lily of the valley sitting on Basil's table. Everyone is united as Sonny's only explicit words in the entire game are finally voiced. How fitting it is that Sonny and his friend group being whole again is paralleled by this video series finally being complete. The Word document I'm currently reading from is 40,000 words long, 40,002 to be exact. And yet I feel like I still haven't reached the bottom of what there is to unpack. Fortunately and unfortunately, the nature of the best art in the world is such that you can continue to find meaning in it forever. There's no end to what there is to say because there's always another interpretation, another detail that could have been taken into account. I hope I've said most of what needs to be said though, because I certainly tried. Throughout this journey, we've looked at how the unconscious boils to the surface, how your psyche is nothing but an ever-progressing conflict of opposites, how a broken mind seeks refuge in the empty reveries of fragmented thoughts, and finally, how a healed mind overcomes the conflict of opposites and reconciles the conscious with the unconscious to start anew and accept itself for what it is. I'd like to thank you all for joining me in this long exploration of OMOCAT's masterpiece. I wasn't sure initially whether I wanted to make a YouTube video at all, and I ended up brooding on it for several months, thinking people might not be interested in what some random person has to say, and that I'd just end up repeating what other people have said before anyway. It has been over 2 years since the game came out after all. But seeing the response, I'm extremely happy that I did end up making that first video, as exploring this game as thoroughly as I have has been one of the most rewarding things I've done in a long time. Not least because doing so seems to have disproven my fear that people wouldn't be interested in what I have to say. To sign off, there's an artistic saying that reminds us of the inevitability of death, of how all things come to an end. The Latin phrase, memento mori, remember death. But although that saying is true, as evidenced by the time left in this video, after playing this game, I would still change that saying into memento OMORI, because the experience of this game has honestly been sort of life-changing, and by immersing myself in the life of Sunny, I've come away with a second-hand insight into the true value of human life and of the experiences of other people, which has been so illuminating that I might as well have experienced it myself, and which has dramatically opened my mind and changed the way I look at things forever, especially in the realm of emotion. I don't know exactly why it was this game in particular. Maybe it's because I related to Sunny in so many ways. Maybe it's because of the frankly insane amount of symbolism in the game, or maybe it was even something of a coincidence that I happened to play the right game in the right state of mind at the right time. In any case, the result is the same. Some of us come across pieces of art which have this strangely life-changing effect on us at some point in our lives. And what exactly it is may vary from person to person. I'm sure there are many people watching this video who didn't experience it the way I did. That's the nature of the subjective, after all. But, for me at least, that special, mind-shifting artwork was OMORI. Thanks for watching.